start? Okay, thanks. So what we have seen yesterday, we have seen how we can decide or not if a system in finite dimension is stabilizable or not. And we would like to do the same today, but for PDE, for infinite dimensional system, and especially when the control is at the boundary of the domain. So I just recall what will be the plan. So we will recall the Duhamel formula for infinite dimensional system, especially for the stock system. And next, we will see how to take into account non-homogeneous boundary condition. We will study the stabilizability of this system and the feedback stabilization. So, you have seen yesterday with Professor Hadimurti and a little bit with me that when you have the heat equation here in the domain, you can expand the solution in terms of eigenfunction of the Laplace operator. So, if I denote by E lambda j the kernel of this operator, but taking into account the boundary condition minus lambda j, we have an orthogonal sum for L2, and choosing a basis in each eigenspace, I obtain Hilbertian basis for L2, and we will use this basis to find the solution. So this for each j. J is the index for the eigenvalue. I can have multiple eigenvalue. So if the multiplicity of lambda j is Lj, I choose here a basis for the eigenspace, the corresponding eigenspace, and the semi-group corresponding to the Laplace operator is expressed like that. It's exactly the formula we have seen yesterday. And we can also use a projection onto each eigenspace parallel to the sum of the others. So it means that here we just take the component corresponding to the element here in this basis. So in the 1D case, we can do explicit calculation. And if for the index j in capital N, the eigenvalue, okay, it depends if we speak of the eigenvalue of the Laplace operator or minus the Laplace operator. Here it's the Laplace operator, so it's a negative eigenvalue, minus j square pi square over L square, which is the length of the interval here. And the corresponding eigen function is this one. In dimension 1, the multiplicity is equal to 1. And so, because of that here, the Lj here is equal to 1. So we have just one sum here in place of 2 because the multiplicity is 1. And this is the inner product in L2. So it's given by this. This is the coordinate of the initial condition in the basis Ej. Okay. So now, what happened with the Burger equation? So it's the first model for which we have something which is a little bit more complicated than in the case of the heat equation. We can do the same as previously, but now we can have complex eigenvalue. But Because I assume that the function here, ws, is a real value function. So I explain here the notation. Partial I here is the partial derivative with respect to xi. I can choose a combination of partial derivative or a special one. So it's just a convective term expressed in terms of the derivative of some term with respect to xi. I just recall that the 1D Burger equation is du of a dt, okay, plus d of a dx of u square of the 2, and if we consider the viscous Burger equation, we will have some viscosity here. So this is the classical Burger equation. So if I linearize this system around 0, what I get is no, sorry. I linearize not around 0, but I assume that I have some stationary solution, US, and so I would like to write U as the sum of US plus V. And so in that case, if I write the equation for V, I get dV over dt minus nu d2V dx square plus this term, when I replace here u by this sum, I get so dx of USV plus dx d US plus the quadratic term corresponding to V, v square of the 2. But this term is quadratic, so when I take the linearized Burger equation, I obtain this equation, this operator, and now in 2 or 3 dimensions, I can say, okay, I can take here dx1 or dx2 or any combination of this type of derivative. It's a Stoy model. And so this stands for this type of notation. This is the notation. And so this is the linearized Burger equation, linearized about WS. So the difference here is that we can have a complex eigenvalue, but because I take a real value function here, if lambda is an eigenvalue, lambda bar, the conjugate, is also an eigenvalue, and so I have 2 choices here. Either I consider only complex function. So starting from the equation here, I can either say, okay, I just look at function taking value in R, or I can complexify the system and say, okay, I replace Z by some complex function, still denoted by Z, but now Z takes value in C. And so in that case, the decomposition will be for L2 of omega, but L2 corresponding to complex function taking values in C, or I can choose to stay in R. So in that case, I have to introduce the complex eigen space, but also because the eigenvalue are not the operator is not symmetric in that case, I have to introduce the generalized eigenspace. It means that I have a decomposition not only in a diagonal form, but I have some Jordan blocks. Okay? So if I have Jordan blocks, and if lambda is complex, necessarily these spaces here are generated by complex value function, but to these spaces I can associate the corresponding real space. And okay, so this is the framework for complex value function. And now, okay, I would like to say something else. Okay, so now if I have an eigenvalue lambda j which is real, for which the imaginary part is equal to 0, so in that case the corresponding generalized eigenspace is just the space spanned by the real part of this function. It means that if lambda j is real, so lambda j is equal to lambda bar, so I can choose bases for this space which are either real function or purely imaginary function. And so I just take here the real function corresponding to this space. But if the imaginary part is different from 0, I have to take the real part and the imaginary part in order to generate what is called the generalized real eigenspace. And so using this, I have now a decomposition which is a little bit more complicated, but which is very similar to what we found in finite dimension. And the nice thing is the following one. It's very important to understand that, because we shall use this later. So the trick is the following. If you have a symmetric operator like the Laplace operator, you have a Hilbertian basis constituted of eigen function. And so you have the orthogonality property saying that if you take two eigenfunction in this basis, two different eigenfunctions are orthogonal. Now, if you have an operator which is not symmetric, let us say of this form, minus, okay. So in that case, the basis you obtain is not an orthogonal basis. But you can choose a basis. Let us say for the generalized eigenspace associated with lambda j, and another one, not for this operator, but for the corresponding adjoint operator. So the adjoint of this is the Laplace operator, but when I take the adjoint of di ws z, making integration by part with some function phi, what I get minus di phi times ws times z. So the adjoint of this operator, because I have minus here, it's that one. Okay? So it's another operator. And what we know that if lambda j is an eigenvalue for this operator, the conjugate here will be an eigenvalue for the adjoint operator. Okay, and so now I can choose another basis of this operator in such a way that I have the orthogonality relation. So I denote here by Ej plus another index k here, a basis. So k varies between 1 and n of lambda j naught, or lambda j. So I have a basis of this generalized eigenspace, another one for this space, and in such a way that I have this the orthogonality property. So this is very important since we use that to make explicit computation. So I summarize. Okay, I start here with an operator which is not symmetric. Okay, because it is not symmetric, I have complex eigenvalue. But because Ws take values in R, so the coefficients of this operator are in R. So if lambda j is an eigenvalue, its conjugate is also an eigenvalue of the same operator. Okay, so what is important to understand about the generalized eigenspace here is the fact that if I start in the generalized eigenspace, the solution corresponding to the equation here is, for each time, belongs to the same generalized eigenspace. Okay, so the spectrum is of this form if I can have either real eigenvalue or conjugate eigenvalue. Okay, and so I use the same type of decomposition for adjoint operator of the initial operator, and I denote by J star here the corresponding generalized eigenspace for the adjoint. Yeah, and I choose a basis for G and a basis for G star corresponding to the same eigenvalue in such a way that I have this type of the orthogonality property. And now, so it means that I generalize to a PDE operator with boundary condition what is well known for matrices. It's nothing more than that. And using that, you have a complete representation of the semi-group here. It means that in place of having just exponential of lambda j t, the inner product of the initial condition with the element in the basis and the element in the basis, here there are two differences. One is that you have not the same function here and here. This is due to the fact that we use the B-orthogonality property, which is true if we take a function here and here, but which is not of this type. So this is the first difference. And the second one is because we have a Jordan block, we have not only these three terms, these three factors, but we have also here a polynomial of t, but which is of the degree can be known. So this is the representation formula of the semigroup in the case of non-symmetric operator. Okay. So now let us go to the Stokes operator. So we would like to make progress. What we have done up to now. I explain. So for the heat operator, we know everything. We use eigenfunction. So if we want to look at the linearized Navier-Stokes equation, there are two difficulties. One is due to the fact that we have a non-symmetric operator. And the other difficulty comes from the fact that we have the pressure. And so there is something new. So we first look at the Stokes operator. Here, what we have looked at the linearized Berger operator, and after that, we will make, we will mix the difficulty in order to find the semigroup for the linearized Navier-Stokes operator equation. So in the case of Navier-Stokes equation, we have to make the distinction between the case when we have Dirichlet condition or Dirichlet and Neumann and eventually other type of boundary condition. So in the case of Dirichlet condition, we have the following decomposition of L2 vector field. So you take an L2 vector field, you can decompose this vector field into function with divergence which is equal to 0, plus another condition on the boundary. The normal trace here is equal to 0 on the boundary of the domain, plus the gradient of function in H1. So this is known as the Helmholtz or Leray decomposition. And okay, it's explained there, but I have to make some more precise comment, more details. Okay. So first, something about the trace. You know that function in H1, for function in H1, you can define the value at the boundary. Okay, so if you start with some z, and if gamma is the boundary of omega, you know that the value at the boundary is well defined in space L2, and even better, you can say that give some meaning here in some fractional Sobolev space. You know that? You have seen that or not? Okay. Well, it's known or not? It's okay? Yeah, trace theorem for H1 function, it's okay? Yeah, I can, okay. So you know that L2 functions are defined almost everywhere. So if you want to take a value at some point, it doesn't work, okay? So the idea for all this construction is to, you know that this is a strange space in the sense that, okay, you say it's a function which are in L2, for which the derivative, all the partial derivatives are also in L2. But the idea is to say, okay, I can approximate your function in H1 by C infinity function. And taking, I assume here that omega is bounded. And taking C infinity function, I can now, I know what is the trace, the value at the boundary. And in order to define the trace in that case, what you have to do, you have to proceed by approximation. And you have to use this, but I can explain things very quickly in the case when omega, let us say it's an Rn minus 1, an half space, times R plus star. So it means, so assume that you have, this is Rn minus 1, this is R plus. So you would like to define the value here at the boundary. And you would like to show that this value is in this space or in a better space. And so what you do, first you use the fact that C infinity function with compact support in omega bar. So omega is this space here. This space is dense in H1 of omega. So you proceed by density argument. You have to show that this is well defined for function in this space, and so you use the fact that this is with compact support. So it means that outside some ball here, the function is 0. So at infinity, z is 0. But here the value is known. And so you write something of this form. You write that the value, okay, I just write the integral. So if I take the integral from 0 to infinity of d over dx n, this is the last coordinate, of z square, what I get the value of z square at infinity minus the value of z square for xn equal to 0. So if I denote by x prime here this coordinate, I have this formula. Okay, and now with a sign minus. Okay, and now I would like to have an estimate of z at the boundary. So to have an estimate of z at the boundary, what I take the integral of this guy from 0 to infinity. So an integration along this axis of z square. And what I see that I have, no, here, sorry. The integration is from minus infinity to plus infinity. So yeah, I have this integral here, the sign minus, but it's not important. I'm going to take the absolute value of this term here, and this is just 2 times dz over dxn times c. Okay, it's clear or not? And so using Young inequality and Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, I can majorize this by some term depending on the gradient of z in L2 times the gradient of z in L2 of the full domain. So it means that I can estimate this in this space if I can estimate the norm of z in H1. Okay, so it means that the operator from the space this space, but with the H1 norm, is continuous from this space into, so the trace operator is continuous here from L2 into L2 of Rn minus 1. Of course, if I want to have this type of estimate, I have to use Fourier transform in order to first define Sobolev space with fractional order and so on. So the trick is that if you know that the function is in L2 and its derivatives are also in L2, you can define the value at the boundary. So now, if the function is in L2, sorry, with values in Rd, it means that I have a D component here. The value at the boundary is not defined, and the value, just the normal trace at the boundary is not defined too. Okay? But now, if I add the condition that the divergence of Z is 0 or it belongs to L2, so in that case, I cannot define the trace, but I can define the normal trace. This is well defined, and this can be done by using the divergence formula. So I write the divergence formula. So the divergence of Z times a scalar function phi integrated over omega, just making integration by parts, is minus Z the inner product with grad phi plus on the boundary z dot n times phi. Okay, here z is a vector and phi is scalar function. So this is true if z and phi are a regular function. But now, if I take z in this space, I just know that z is in L2 and the divergence is 0 or is in L2. This term is well defined. Now, if I take phi in H1, this term is well defined too. And so you have an equality which is true for regular function and which is well defined if z is in this space and phi is in this space. So of course I cannot write the integral like that, but I can replace this by a duality product between phi. Okay, what I know about phi, I know that phi is in H1, so the trace of phi is in H1 half of gamma. It means that I can define this term here in the dual of this space, minus 1 half, just using this relation and saying that this term is defined by this equality when I put this on the other side. So, what we have here, we have a partial information on the derivative of z, and using this partial information, I can define z dot n. So, if z dot n is equal to 0, I can say, okay, I choose the function for which z dot n is equal to 0. And why we take that? We take that because, as before, we always proceed by approximation. We proceed by approximation. It means that we look for functions which are in C infinity with compact support, and for which the divergence is equal to 0. So if I have this, and if I take the closure of this space, so I take the closure of the space of C infinity function. Here I have D component here. So in RD, for which the divergence is 0. If I take the closure of this space for the norm corresponding to the space little bit more complicated than what is written here, the space corresponding to the norm, I denote it by E here. So the norm is the L2 norm plus the L2 norm of the divergence. And because I would like to have inverse space, I take just square and root square of that. So if I take the closure of this space in that norm, what I get exactly the space which is written here. Okay? Because taking the closure, what I know that in this space necessarily z dot n is equal to 0 because z are C infinity function, and replacing in this formula because this is 0, I can sorry, I am So when I, who can help me? Why z dot n is necessarily 0 when I take the closure here? So this is true for any function. Yeah, and yeah, no, it means that, yeah, sorry, this quantity here, I have to write like that. Okay. So the trace is defined like that, okay? Yeah, I made a mistake. It's not, yeah. So it means that in that case, this term is 0, this term is also 0, and so this term is also 0. Okay? So for function belonging to this space, the z grad phi is necessarily 0 for every phi in H1. Now, if I take a limit of the sequence in this space, I see that this term is still 0 at the limit. So it means that coming back to this formula, if at the limit this term is 0, this term is also 0 because the divergence is 0. So necessarily, I keep the fact that z dot n is 0 at the boundary. Okay? So this term is very important for application. And now, I write the fact that I can decompose the L2 vector field into function in this space plus the gradient of function in H1. So typically, you start with a L2 vector field and you can decompose into something which is a gradient plus something which is a divergence free. So how I can get this decomposition is written there, but I can explain in detail that. So you start with something which is in some function which is in L2. It's a vector, D component, and you would like to decompose this. So first you solve the following elliptic problem, elliptic equation. You compute the solution to this equation. Divergence of z. I look for the sign. Okay. And you look for P in H1 naught. This is not defined in L2 because we start with L2, so taking the divergence, we obtain something else. So it can be identified with some element in H minus 1. It means that in a weak formulation, we have to interpret this as the following integral. So taking phi in H1 naught, this formula is correct, and this is exactly the meaning I give to this term. Okay, so P is well defined. Now, I write the equation for another elliptic equation, but with a Neumann boundary condition. And I write this in this form. It means sorry. It means what? It means that formally, I can say that, but this is not true. Why? Because Z is just in L2. So Z in L2, this term is not defined because Z dot N is in L2. So it seems strange to write things like that, but I know now that not Z and grad P separately, but Z minus grad P, its divergence is 0. Because if I take the divergence of Z minus grad P, so in the sense of distribution, this is the divergence of Z minus Laplace P. And since P is the solution to this equation, necessarily the divergence of this term is 0. And because the divergence is 0, the normal trace is well defined in H minus 1, minus 1 half. So it means that this is in H minus 1 half of gamma. And so I can solve this Neumann problem using Lax-Milgram lemma. And I found the solution Q, which is in H1 of omega. So everything here is well defined, and I have to decompose this. Of course, I could say I take the sum of the two. So taking the sum of the two, what I get Laplace of P plus Q is equal to the divergence of phi. And taking the sum, I get the normal derivative of the sum is equal to Z dot N. But we have seen that Z dot N is not well defined, so I have to make this decomposition. But making this decomposition, the grad of P is well defined, the grad of Q is well defined too. And so I can say that Z minus grad of P minus grad of Q is a function which is in L2, for which the divergence is 0, because when I compute the divergence here, I get 0. And its normal trace is 0 because of this relation. So this difference here is in that space, and it's why I denote it by pi z. So it means I take the pi here correspond to the projector from L2 onto this space, and the orthogonal part correspond to that term here. So this is very important decomposition for L2 function. Okay, so now having this decomposition, I can do exactly the same as for the heat equation. Why? Because you have seen yesterday with Professor Sritaran that you can solve the Stokes equation. So I take the notation. The following Stokes equation, there is the second member here, right hand side. So z equal to 0 at the boundary. So you solve using Lax-Milgram lemma. So you take a function z which are in H1, and for which the divergence is 0, or H1 plus the trace here, H1 naught, and the divergence is 0. And so when you look for the variational formulation, you take test function phi, which are in the same space, V, and making integration by part. So you get here the classical grad z, grad phi. And as you have seen yesterday, this term is 0 because grad p phi is just minus p times the divergence of phi plus the trace, but the trace here is 0, and the divergence of phi is 0 because phi is in V, and in V the functions are 0. So you have some elliptic operator. It's a symmetric elliptic operator. And so you can use, okay. So I denote, okay. I introduce the corresponding operator. If I write this, this is not the right operator. I have to take the projection of this operator because taking the projection here, I eliminate the pressure. So I can transform this equation into the following one. I can say, okay, I take the projection here. And since I look for in this space, this equation here is equivalent to the following one if I add the condition Z is in V. Okay, so the operator now is this one, and it is known as the Stokes operator. It's a symmetric operator. Its resolvent is compact, and so we can use exactly the same method as before. So we can take, we can find eigenfunction for the Stokes operator, and we have exactly the same semi-group formula as in the case of the heat equation, except that now the basis here is different, and this is L2 with values in RT. Okay. So what is the domain of the operator is when we have Dirichlet boundary condition and when the boundary of omega is regular, at least C2 or C11, it can be shown that the functions are in H2 when the right-hand side here, F is in L2. And so this is the domain of the Stokes operator. And now, if we have some convective term here, what we get the corresponding linearized Navier-Stokes operator. When we compute the adjoint, because of integration by part, we have a minus sign here and the transpose of this matrix function. Okay, so I do not write the details here for this operator, but you understand that this is very similar to the Burger equation. And so in the case of a non-symmetric operator, I have to replace this formula by using bi-orthogonal function here, bi-orthogonal basis, and putting some polynomial when I have the corresponding Jordan block. Okay. I have introduced at the beginning a model corresponding to a rectangle with some obstacle here, and we would like to study the flow around this obstacle and to make some control of the shading of vortices. Of course, the nice problem could be to to have no boundary here, just velocity at infinity. So we have simplified. And we simplify also by taking here a Neumann boundary condition on this side. Which is a simplification of an infinite channel, which gives also a good result. But it's a simplification of this problem, but it's much more complicated than that one, if I take here a Dirichlet condition. So this problem, even if I take the boundary here far enough, is completely different from that one. Of course, because of that, the analysis is more complicated. So I have two choices. Either I skip the details here, or I give a little bit more details. What do you think? I can give some details. Up to now, you are not too lost. No, it's okay. Okay. So I take here. Okay, I take three parts with Dirichlet condition, and now I would like to make Neumann. If I put Dirichlet, it's just yeah, it's a closed domain. This is also a bounded domain, but with Neumann, it's yeah. Okay, so I'm going to give some details. Okay, so now I take the case when I have mixed Dirichlet and Neumann boundary condition. So the first difference is that now, when I make the previous Helmholtz decomposition, I do exactly the same as before. This is not very complicated. But now I have to take the normal trace 0, but only on the Dirichlet part. So it means only on the free side here, plus, of course, on the boundary of the disk. So this is very similar, and I can introduce the corresponding projector exactly in the same way, except that now, when I solve the problem for the function q, this condition is given only on the Dirichlet part, while on the Neumann part, I take q equal to 0. It's why I have here a decomposition with the gradient of function in H1, but for which the trace on gamma n is 0. So it's different from the previous case. Yeah, okay, so I have also the space of function for which the trace on gamma is 0. So I have two different space here. When I put gamma n, it means that the trace on gamma n is 0, and gamma d when the trace of gamma d is 0. And I have to introduce this space, the space of H1 function with divergence free, and for which the trace here is 0 on gamma d. Not only the normal trace, but the full trace, normal and tangential. Okay. And now, the main difference with the previous case is the following one. When okay, it's written there. So I start with exactly the same equation as before. So the divergence is 0. Z is equal to 0 on some part of the boundary. And on the other part, I can take either dz over dn minus p, and or something taking into account the symmetric gradient. Let us take this one. So, I can solve this problem exactly as before using Lax-Milgram lemma. There is no difference. Okay? So the difference now is when I take the projection. If I take the projection of this equation, I can write, okay, I take the projection. But now, contrarily as before, I cannot say that the projection of the gradient of P is 0 here. This is the difference with the previous case. Why? Because if I go back, when I take the projection here, the gradient of a function must be the gradient of a function in H1 gamma n. It means that the pressure that I get using the projector must have the trace on gamma n equal to 0. And it is not the case here. Why it is not the case here? Because this pressure here has not a trace equal to 0 because of that condition on gamma n. So what is the trace of P here? It is given there. I just take the inner product with n, and I found this. Okay, don't forget that z is a vector here. So into d, z is the horizontal velocity and the vertical velocity. So when I write dz over dn, it is also a vector. It's dz1 over dn and dz2 over dn. So it means that this is completely well defined. It is this vector. So in that case here, the normal is just on this side is just 1, 0. It means that in the case of a channel here, this is exactly the first component. So it's a scalar, and so the relation here is just P equal to dz1 over dn. So because of that, when I define the Stokes operator, I have to take the divergence of all this quantity here. Here I have used the notation with symmetric gradient, but I can use that one. And I cannot eliminate the pressure. And so I have to define the domain of the Stokes operator as being a function in H1 with the divergence is equal to 0 and the trace is equal to 0 on gamma d, and for which there exists a pressure such that the divergence of all this quantity here is in L2. And what is nice is that when I write this quantity, I have to put the pressure, but this quantity does not depend on the P I choose here for which the divergence is 0. The divergence is in L2. So if I take the P here is not unique, but this defines the corresponding Stokes operator in a unique way. And contrarily as before, A naught is different from that. Okay? Okay, so this is exactly what I've explained that here. And there is some difficulty due to that if I take into D. if I take a rectangle like that, with Dirichlet condition everywhere, we can obtain regularity result, and we can prove that if I take Dirichlet condition everywhere, if I take f in L2, the solution will be in H2. It will be regular. So in the case of corner, like that, there is a recent result by, in a series of papers by Mazia, Rossmann, and some others, showing that the best we can obtain an inclusion like that. We can show that we have not the H2 regularity, but 3/2 plus something. Actually, the correct or the best framework is to work with Sobolev space with weight. So if we take the correct weight, you have H2 with weight, but if you want to work with classical Sobolev space, you have to do that. Okay, so this is a restriction, and of course it's a source of difficulty. But the nice thing is that in all this situation, we have an operator for which the spectrum is symmetric with respect to the real axis. This is due to the fact that we work with a function with values in R. And we have this type of nice inequality here. So, when you want to use Lax-Milgram lemma, you have to show some coercivity condition. Here, because of the convective term, we have no coercivity condition necessarily for -A, but if we take a shift, choosing lambda naught large enough, we have this type of inequality. We lose a little bit, so if we start with minus nu Laplace z, so nu is the coefficient in front of the Laplace operator, we lose a little bit because of the convective term. So here the lose is 1/2, but it can be something else. And we have the same for the adjoint operator. Okay, so this is the spectrum of A in this type of configuration with a cylinder when some parameter here, depending on the velocity at the inflow condition of the channel, times the diameter of the disk divided by the viscosity. So this is a parameter. So depending on this parameter, we have a different type of spectrum. Of course, why we have different type of
WS here, when you try to calculate the spectrum,
yeah.
What is the WS?
Yeah, this is very important. So we take, so we are in this situation. Here we have Dirichlet condition, and here a Neumann condition. And what is non-zero in that case, we take an inflow boundary condition. So we take here a parabolic profile. So this is the inflow velocity, and corresponding to this velocity, we have some stationary solution, the WS, which correspond to this type of flow, for which you have vortices like that. So this is the picture of the WS. So this is the WS. But of course, when you write the linear,
free boundary. There is no Dirichlet on it.
Dirichlet, and Neumann. And so the corresponding linearized operator is that one. So when you increase here the US here, so you change, everything is fixed except US. So you increase this value, you increase what is called the Reynolds number. So US, sorry, yeah, US is the velocity here. So corresponding to US, you have a double US. So when you increase the value of US here, you change the WS. And because you change the WS, you change the linearized operator. So what happened is the following. We have, in all these situations, we have only two unstable eigenvalue for which this is the zero value here. So for which the real part is positive. And
how do you compute it?
numerically. Yeah.
WS, everything is numerical.
Yeah. It's only, only in some, we can make explicit computation only, for example, in a channel with periodic boundary conditions. So in that case, but when we put some obstacle, it's only.
There are theoretical results.
Yeah.
For in bounded domains, actually, spectrum is contained in a sector.
Yes.
For exterior domain, you have a parabolic continuous spectrum, and
Yeah.
only finite number of discrete.
Yeah.
That's Babenko's result.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm thinking if you actually make the boundaries bigger, eventually you get most of it becomes continuous spectrum.
Yeah, no, sure, I completely agree.
Yeah.
And this is a completely, okay, so this is a nice remark. I would like, when you have this type of inequality, with here two different norms, H1 and L2, so in that case, you have what is called an analytic, the generator of an analytic semigroup or parabolic operator. So it means that the spectrum is contained in a sector. This is the first important point. The second one is that the resolvent is compact. So when we mix the two assumptions, what we have? We have only a discrete spectrum, isolated eigenvalue with finite multiplicity. And what we would like to do, we would like to stabilize this kind of flow with a fixed decay rate. So we fix the decay rate. It means that I would like to have some decay of exponential minus omega t. And I look at the eigenvalue which are on the right of this axis. So because of this type of condition of the parabolic structure of the spectrum, we have here, because this is bounded by this axis and by the sector. So you are in a compact set, and because of the condition that the eigenvalue are isolated, you have only a finite number of eigenvalue, with each eigenvalue is of finite multiplicity, and the even better than that, the generalized eigenspace are of finite dimension, which is a stronger result. So it means that what I'm going to call the unstable part of the dynamical system is of finite dimension. I shall use that for computing a feedback. Now, if we have an unbounded domain, we have a part of a spectrum which is a continuous spectrum. And it is not clear or not the role of the continuous spectrum in the stability analysis. There is a recent paper by Noystupa in Journal of Mathematical Field Mechanics, studying not stability, but asymptotic stability of flow, fluid flow in the presence of a continuous spectrum. So maybe the role of the continuous spectrum is not a disaster for feedback stabilization, but it's something which is completely open.
Yeah, it always lies on the left arm. That's the proof by
yeah.
It doesn't move.
Yeah.
When you rotate, even if you rotate,
yeah.
the parabolic continuous spectrum only goes up and down.
Ah.
That's the way is located. So otherwise you have algebraic decay and so forth.
Yeah. So no, it's very.
Basically, you compute results, or is it grid independent?
We have to check that it is grid independent. So it means that we have.
He uses a finite grid.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I completely agree. But yeah, no.
are some more unsolvable
Yeah, okay. This is another very important question. So what we check numerically is that if we refine the grid, we get, at least for the first part of the spectrum, the part we are going to use, we have convergence. There are some, from the numerical point of view, there are some nice results about a posteriori error analysis for eigenvalue problem, but only in the case of a symmetric operator. I don't know if it can be generalized or not to this type of operator. But of course, it's another question which is very important. Otherwise,
What was the question?
no, about what happens when you refine the grid. So you refine the grid. Normally, you change. So you change your finite dimensional space, and you may change the spectrum. So what we have done is to check that we have a grid which is fine enough in order to have the first part independent, nearly independent of the grid, of course. So when we increase this value here, you will see that we have still two unstable eigenvalue, and this part of the spectrum move on the right. So in the case of the cavity, remember the flow in an open cavity, the situation is more tricky, and it is an interesting case because in here we have 8 unstable eigenvalue and many eigenvalue close to the imaginary axis. Okay, so now I would like to finish in 10 or 15 minutes, little bit faster, about how to take into account the non-homogeneous boundary conditions. So we have seen yesterday how to do that in the 1D case, and what I'm going to present is just the generalization of that to the n-dimensional case. So we start with the heat equation, which is the easy case, and we would like to write this PDE in this form. As we have explained yesterday, the B will not be with values in Z, but in something strange. I'm going to give the details at the end of the lecture today. Okay, so what we do, we solve this elliptic equation for each t, because u depends on t, on x also, but this is the equation for w. And we look for z, the solution to the complete problem, sorry, in the form y plus w. So we write the equation for y. We have minus w prime. And now, because we have homogeneous boundary condition, we can use the formula of a semi-group in that case. So we use it, and we use the Duhamel formula. It's exactly the type of calculation I have done yesterday. And making integration by part in time here with respect to the tau variable. So what I get the integral which is given there, because when I take the derivative of the semi-group with respect to tau here, I get minus a. This is one of the boundary term, and the other one cancel with the w. It's exactly what we have seen yesterday. And so now I write the sum between y and w. I obtain z. And so the formula for z is that one. The d is just to say the du is just the w. And I formally write the equation in this form, formally, because I should have to explain where this guy lives, but I'm going to give the details after. So now it's explained here. I have to understand this equation as an extension of a semi-group onto a larger space. So it means that another way to say that is to say that I take the definition of this equation in the sense of transposition. It means that I take a test function phi and I transpose the operator and also the operator b on phi. And this is well defined if I take phi in the domain of the adjoint operator. In the case of the heat equation, the adjoint is just the Laplace operator, the same one. And so another way is to start from the TDE, that one, multiply by phi and make integration by part of using green formula in space. And so what I get the boundary term here, and this boundary term corresponds exactly to this, so it means that b star phi is equal to minus the normal derivative of phi. So what I have explained here, I can do the same for Burger, Stokes, and the linearized Navier-Stokes. The only difficulty is that I have to solve the equation for W. So I look for W, and because of the convective term here, this operator is not necessarily invertible. So when I want to solve this equation, I have to add some shift here, lambda naught W, but I can do that. And so, because of that, I have here lambda naught W minus W prime now. And when I use the Duhamel formula, I have also to write this in this form. But this is not at all a problem. We make exactly the same computation as before. What is important is to write the corresponding operator here. And so finally, now the operator B is given there. So it seems that the B depends on lambda naught, the lambda naught for which I have taken there. It's not the case. Why it's not the case? Because lambda naught appears here and in the D. So in some sense, this is the inverse of lambda naught minus A. It's not exactly true, but it's like that. So it means that this quantity here is completely independent of lambda naught. And this is the B. And we see that when we make the integration by part. So when we make the integration by part, we find the expression of B star, which is given there. Because of the convective term, now we have an additional term in the integration by part, and the adjoint of A is not A. But we see that the B star does not depend on lambda naught, so it means that B also does not depend on lambda naught. So this is the situation for the Berger equation. We do the same for the stocks. We will do, okay, I shall recall this tomorrow, okay? Okay, maybe I have to switch to skip that. And now, a few words in order to finish about the stabilizability. What we would like to have, we would like to have the stabilizability of some pair AB with some decay rate. It's exactly what is represented here in this picture. So it means that I look at the eigenvalue for which the real part is greater than minus omega. So I take all this eigenvalue here, and I would like to stabilize only that part. And the result is the following one. The pair AB is stabilizable with the decay rate minus omega. It means that A plus omega I, the identity D, is stabilizable if and only if for each J, it means that for each eigenvalue separately, the B star of this family is linearly independent, and this family is the basis of the kernel, not of the generalized eigenspace, just the eigenspace. So I have exactly the same condition as in finite dimension we have seen yesterday. And we have the same condition. Why? Because we just look at the system projected onto the unstable part, and it's a finite dimensional system. Okay, so checking this linear independence condition means that we have to look at the eigenvector corresponding to A star and assume that the B star of phi is 0, and we have to show that this is 0. This is exactly the same as before. So let us look at what happened. Sorry. Yeah, let us look at the. Okay. Let us look at this condition. I take M here to say that I localize the control on a part of the boundary. I look for control of finite dimension, but this is not really important. So now I have some A, which correspond to the Laplace operator with Dirichlet condition, and some B. And the B is formally like that. Now I have to say, to identify what is the B star. So I make the integration by part, and the B star is exactly as before, minus the normal derivative of phi times M, because I have integrated the M in the B. But the M is positive on the part where I take the control. And so the condition B star phi equal to 0 is the same because the M is positive on the part where I take the control, as d phi over dn equal to 0. So checking the stabilizability means I have to look at the eigenfunction and to look if I add this condition, necessarily the phi is 0. And this is true for different reasons. One is that in some cases we can do an explicit computation. So let us make an explicit computation. Assume that I have a domain which is a rectangle, In that case, I know explicitly all the eigenfunction. I have a family indexed by J and L. Yeah, so I have a product of two sign functions. The eigenvalues are known, and I control just on one part of a rectangle. So I have a situation like that. I have a rectangle here, 0A, 0B. I just control on that part. And I would like to show that the system is stabilizable by taking a control here. And to check that, I have to look at the eigenfunction and look if I obtain family which is independent. So I have to look at the B star of this eigenfunction. And what I see that I have here, I make the explicit computation. So the normal derivative here is just the derivative with respect to x1, because this is the vertical axis and the normal is horizontal. So in that case, I get some sine. The derivative here is just a cosine function. Maybe this is, sorry, this is missing, but it's not important. So normally I have something depending on G, because I have a cosine here at J pi. So the term minus 1 to the power J is missing here. Okay, but it's a non-zero term. And so I have this family, and I have to check that I obtain a linear independent family, and this is true. I have just to take sine function on one side, and okay. So the stabilizability condition is true in that case. Okay, what we can do if we have another geometry. So assume that you have some omega here, and you want to control only on a part of the boundary. And you have to check that if you take an eigenfunction here of a Laplace operator with Dirichlet condition on all the boundary, you have to check that the system is stabilizable by a control here. So it means that you add the condition B star of phi is equal to 0 on that part, and you would like to prove that if you have this condition plus this, necessarily phi is 0. And the method is very simple, because phi is 0 here, and the normal derivative is also 0 on the same part of the boundary. You can extend the function by phi by 0, and check, because you have a nice matching condition here, that the Laplace of phi is the same everywhere. It means that this equation is satisfied not only in omega, but in the extended domain. And in the extended domain, you know that phi is 0. So you can use the Holmgren uniqueness theorem to show that phi is necessarily 0. So in other situations like linearized Navier-Stokes or linearized Burger, the situation is a little bit more complicated, and you have to replace the Holmgren theorem by some other tools like Kalman type inequality. So I skip the details here, and I go to the explicit computation for 1D and 2D models. So let us look at the 1D equation in the interval 0, 1, with one control on one side. And I would like to have some decay rate, a prescribed decay rate corresponding to exponential minus 10 t. I compute the eigenvalue and the corresponding eigenfunction. And I would like to stabilize not A, but A plus omega I, with omega equal to 10. So I have just one unstable, only one unstable eigenvalue. So the unstable space is the space generated by